Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today our question comes from Arctic Ruffner. He says this: Elizabeth Smart was just sexually assaulted again. She started a self-defense group called Smart Defense, and it looks terrible. YouTube won't let me post the video here, but it's on CBS this morning. I think she's being taken advantage of, and the women who are taking these classes are going to get hurt. I know you can't reach out to her, but maybe do a video on this. Thank you. Okay. For anyone not familiar with the story of Elizabeth Smart, as a young girl, she was kidnapped out of her family home by some crazy cult members, basically, who tried to induct her into this weird way of thinking, and they abused her, and some terrible things happened. Years later, she managed to get free and return back to her family home, return back to her life, and yeah, there's a lot to that. Recently, this was in the news. She was on an airplane. The man next to her tried to put his hands on her and grope her, do some inappropriate things, and as a result, that was an impetus that got her thinking, I need to learn how to defend myself. Yeah. So I watched these newsreels, and it's interviews with Ms. Smart explaining her situation, and showing some clips from these self-defense classes. Now, from what I can gather from what I saw, it was two men teaching these classes, not Elizabeth Smart, even though the program is named after her. And I didn't see a lot of technique being shown. There were a bunch of women in a high school wrestling room, and I saw some people holding some pads. I saw some people throwing some elbows, standing across from each other with their hands out there doing some sort of sequence, some type of drill. I don't know. So I can't give a whole lot of commentary on what was being taught. Did it look terrible? I don't know. It didn't look great. But again, context is everything. You could look at any martial arts class and take one moment out of context, like you might be looking at the warm-up. For example, the first thing I do in my warm-up, every day I rotate my joints, I rotate my fingers, right, the wrists and the fingers, and then the elbows, and then the shoulders, and I do all this joint rotation, mostly for me. I look left and I look right, to lubricate the joints. Because I find I'm a lot less sore, a lot less stiff when I do that. But if somebody walked into my class with a camera, filmed, this, and then posted on the internet saying, "Look, Ramsey Dewey thinks this is martial arts technique. You'll never use that in a fight." I mean, obviously not. That's joint rotation just to get synovial fluid going in the joints. Okay? So again, context is everything. But back to this situation, is she being taken advantage of? I don't know. Somebody in that situation, maybe the guys offering the instruction, wanted to use her name to get some notoriety, to get something going. I don't know if they're charging money for it. If they are, then maybe you have a case. Maybe they are trying to take advantage of people. I'm not a big fan of charging for self-defense. I'm not a self-defense instructor. I'm a combat sports coach. I train fighters to win fights. I train professional fighters to win professional fights, amateur fighters to win amateur fights, and so on. And so money changes hands in that equation. But as far as self-defense, not a big fan of charging money for that. There was a video, a women's self-defense video that a number of viewers emailed to me, and they said, "Hey Ramsey, do one of those funny breakdowns of this video like you have with those other ones. If you're not familiar with those MMA fighters, try women's self-defense videos that I did. I've got a whole playlist of them."
Captain, what are you doing? Only Vulcans can do a neck pinch.
Basically, we find these bad women's self-defense videos and then replicate them exactly as they're taught, and they're terrible and they almost never work. Almost. One of the goofiest ones actually did. And so I looked at this thing thinking, okay, are we going to see something funny? Can we find some humor in this? And it was this woman presenting all these situations, like there's a guy standing behind you, he's coming forward, you can do a back kick on him or something like that. And I'm thinking, okay, that is something that can happen. And the back kick wasn't bad. It's just that if you teach self-defense as a bunch of if-then statements, if the guy's right here, if the guy grabs you like this, if you're in this exact scenario, that's pretty unrealistic, because violence doesn't happen in an orderly fashion like that. Violence is chaotic and unpredictable. And violence has way too many variables to turn it into a bunch of if-then statements. That's why really good fighters focus on principles rather than a random collection of potential scenarios. A principle is worth 1,000 techniques. So those women's self-defense technique videos, even the ones that are technically sound, are usually terrible because they present a list of very specific scenarios. And even if the technique is technically sound, it will only work in the exact situation that is played out in the video. Generally without the dynamics of actual violence. But I watched this video, I saw this woman, she showed like 10, 12 techniques, something like that. And I thought, you know what, I wonder who this is. So I want to know this person's name. So I looked her up on the web, I read her website, and found out she was a survivor of sexual assault. This woman was raped, and so she wanted to do something about that, to protect herself and possibly help other people to avoid sexual assault in the future. And I thought, okay, that's a noble goal, but it got me thinking. Being a victim of violence does not qualify you to be a self-defense instructor. It can give you that push in that direction. But in order to be any good at being an instructor of hand-to-hand combat, and when we're talking about self-defense, yeah, there's all the advice that goes along with it. Don't walk down dark alleys or whatever. But it always seems to come back to hand-to-hand combat. And if you want to be any good at hand-to-hand combat, you have to spend hundreds and thousands of hours practicing that. And ultimately, to get any good at that, you're going to get a lot more beaten up. You're going to get ravaged a whole lot more than I hesitate to say this, but you're going to get hurt a whole lot more than you probably would in a single altercation. Unless, of course, that person is stabbing you or shooting you, or on a psychological level, raping you. Serious stuff, right? So this is not one of those funny self-defense videos where somebody grabs your wrist and they show some goofy little thing that'll never work against resistance. No, we're going to talk about it. Think about Batman for a minute. Yes, we're going there. Batman. What happened to Batman? Along with many other superheroes, he witnessed a tragedy. He saw his parents killed by some muggers right in front of his eyes. They were shot to death. And at that moment, young Bruce Wayne swore in his heart, I will do everything I can to prevent this from happening to anyone else. So what happened in the story? Young Bruce Wayne, age 10, immediately becomes Batman? No. He goes out and he trains, and he spends the next several decades doing everything he can to learn everything he can about martial arts and hand-to-hand combat and detective work and law enforcement and everything he possibly can do to become as educated and as empowered as he can to do the task that he has tasked himself with. And, you know, there's a lot of crazy, unrealistic stuff in comic books, but that one we can fall back on. Be like Batman, friends. Tragedy doesn't qualify you to coach. Tragedy doesn't qualify you to train. You have to put in the work. So, man, let's assume for a minute that this, the Miss Smart's class or course or whatever it is no good. I don't know if it is. I haven't seen enough of it. But let's assume it's terrible. As our viewer asked, as he stated, he thinks it will get people hurt. Will it? I hope not. Will these really bad self-defense technique videos out there get people hurt? Man, I hope not. One of the most popular ones, it's got millions of views. It shows this girl who claims to be a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she's showing her friend some techniques. And the first one is a wrist lock. A takedown off of a wrist lock. Fairly complicated move, which took me many years before I was ever able to do that against a resisting opponent fighting back. Now, if I made a video and I said, oh, that technique doesn't work, there would be a bunch of martial artists who would jump on here and say, well, yes, that actually does work. Okay. And I get what you're saying. Yeah, I know, it can work if you put in the work and you study and train diligently and become a good enough martial artist to make it work. However, the average person, let's say the average woman looking for a women's self-defense video because she's worried, I don't want to be physically assaulted out on the street. So I want to know what to do if somebody grabs me by the scruff or by the hair and starts pulling me around and throwing me in the dirt. I want to know what to do. And she goes and sees this video with this complicated wrist lock that takes many years of training to actually be able to perform under any level of resistance. And then thinks to herself, okay, I'm good now because I saw it. That's no good. That'll get people hurt. I had a related question. I don't remember the fellow's name, but he is part of this self-defense class. It's co-ed. There are men and women taking this class together. And he feels like basically the women in his class are being cheated out of an authentic experience because they're not experiencing real-life level combat stress. And so when he spars with them, he tries to go harder or something like that. He feels like he's doing them a favor. And then they inevitably get mad at him and they're like, hey, you're a jerk for going hard, or you're a jerk for pinning me down and not letting me get up, or whatever it is. And he tries to tell them, well, I'm just trying to make it more realistic because nobody will just let you go up, or nobody will choose not to hit you, or something like that. Okay, I understand where he's coming from. I get it. I get it. And at the same time, I understand where these ladies in the class are coming from. You need different levels of resistance. And you also need to come to an accord at what level of resistance you are going to spar or train beforehand. Generally, when teaching a new technique, I'll do it like this. We will sequence the technique. I will show you this is where the hands and the feet go. This is how you technically do the movement. And then we will go through various stages of resistance. All right, at this stage of the movement, you can start to fight back. You try to accomplish this goal. Fighter 2, you try to accomplish this goal. And then we'll move it along. At this stage of the movement, maybe you've got his arm here or whatever it is, or he's got back mount and he's about to choke you. He's got one arm around, but it's not locked up yet. Now go live or whatever it is. Or we might have stipulations like in this drill, strikes, in this drill, no strikes, something like that. We throw a bunch of variables out there. Why? Because there are so many variables in chaos. As I mentioned before, fighting is chaotic, and there are a ton of variables. And your training should address as many of these variables in each possible position. Notice I don't say situation, I say positions. Because what's probably going to happen if you have a big, strong guy attacking a woman who is smaller and weaker, which is usually the case. Bullies, rapists, muggers, whatever, they try to pick an easy target. They're probably going to grab that woman by the hair, drag her on the floor, throw her on the ground, do horrible things to her. And that's going to end up from an unpredictable, chaotic situation to a more predictable set of positions. Something which Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, wrestling, catch wrestling, any of those grappling arts are really good at addressing. So a lot of people ask me when I make these women's self-defense videos, hey, well, you've shown why these are bad, can you show us what to do instead? Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look right now at a self-defense video from one of the most popular self-defense channels on the internet, from T Studios here. Alright, we'll talk about what to do instead. Now, I'm not going to say that these are necessarily bad techniques, but I'm picking this video in particular because it's addressing a similar issue to what Elizabeth Smart faced on the airplane, a man laying hands on her, groping her in an unwanted way. And essentially what T Studios does here is try to counter this with violence, with hand-to-hand combat, often really wimpy, ineffective stuff like slapping the guy with the handbag on the shoulder, which really won't do anything. But essentially, while watching this, let's take a look at some of these. My first thought was, they're teaching people how to start a fight with a belligerent male who does not respect boundaries. If you push someone, their gut-wrench reaction is to push back. If you punch someone, their gut-wrench reaction is to punch back. So, trying to solve this problem with wimpy violence will only escalate that into a dangerous level of violence. So what should we do instead? How about this? Alright, take a look at this scenario. The guy's eyeing that girl's butt, thinking, yeah, I want to grab that. What should be done instead of this girl trying to defend herself with this wimpy violence? I'll tell you what. Guys, don't grab that girl's butt. How about this one? This guy grabbing this girl, tying her up, trying to stick her in the trunk of her car to do who knows what with her when he arrives at his destination. And it shows this girl trying to, break through the tape with a hairpin or something like that, which may or may not work, depending on how well he's taped her up, or whether her hands are behind the back or in front, or what kind of tape it is. What should be done instead? Hey guys, don't tie girls up and put them in the back of your car. Let's look at the Elizabeth Smart situation. She's on a plane. There's a lecherous guy sitting next to her who wants to lay hands on that woman in an inappropriate way. What should be done instead? Should Elizabeth Smart do some kung fu elbows? How about, hey guy, keep your hands to yourself? I think that's a pretty good idea of what to do instead. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.